Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and today we're looking at the two-part Cybermen story, Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel. It's the first Cybermen episode of the revived era. We, of course, have looked at many classic era Cybermen stories before. Pretty much the whole spectrum, really, from Earthshock to Attack of the Cybermen. We've examined the good and the bad, and here we are at an episode that I am surprised about. Like, for me, this has always been a really underrated story of the second series.
I have rather different feelings on it.
Oh.
Just a slight background. Like we haven't recorded an episode for a while, but anyway, I'm kind of glad we took that break because I've watched these episodes, several times by this point, and I was able to really sort of, decide, okay, is this how I feel about this story, as I often do.
Yeah.
And it's good that I've had that time because I've been able to sort of sift through all the emotions. Basically, I have quite a lot of problems with this episode, and to the point where I don't know if I'd say, I'm not sure if I'd say I actively dislike the episode, but there are definitely elements in it that I do actively dislike. And there was a time, after the first and certainly second viewing, where I honestly got a little nervous. I thought, Jesus Christ, am I actually going to get even angrier than I did with fucking Destiny of the Daleks? What the fuck is happening here?
Oh, God.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, good.
I do think... Don't get me wrong, the problems I had with it from the beginning, they're still there, they're the same problems, but I'm not as, fervently, foaming at the mouth to blast this episode apart as I was. So I think it'll be the same arguments, and there's a fair bit to go through, but I'm not going to be as intense, I think, about them as I would have been. And I'm glad, again, that I had that time to really just sort of let these feelings stew, so I could think, okay, well, this is really how I feel about it. And even because I watched it again yesterday, just to again make absolutely sure, and I thought, oh, actually, it's the problems there are the same, and they're still bad, but maybe they're not quite as bad as I originally thought they were. Now, having said that, I don't know if it's guaranteed, but I have a feeling we may have a bigger disagreement on our hands than Girl in the Fireplace. Let's put it that way.
I mean, I was just thinking that because going into Girl in the Fireplace, I basically knew what angle you were going to come at that one with. I was almost prepared for your opinion of Girl in the Fireplace, and I think we were able to sort of navigate that really well. This one is going to be interesting because I love this story. I really adore a lot of what it does. I didn't see much wrong with it when I watched it earlier today. The Cybermen are maybe my favourite Doctor Who villain of all time. I think I've said that before. And this episode finds a really clever way to reintroduce them to Doctor Who. Like, I like that they use the alternate Earth story to almost like give the Cybermen an origin story while still maintaining the history that they have from the classic series. Because it's I think for what the Cybermen are, you need to see their origin if you're going to introduce them to someone for the first time. You can't just describe them like they do with the Sontarans when they first show up, or you can't like sum them up and then watch them wreak havoc like with Dalek. With this, like, in order to like really get the tragedy of the whole Cybermen mythos, you need to see where they came from, and this episode does that really well. It's got a lot else going on for it besides. I think my honestly, but the only main problem I have with it is like at times it doesn't quite blend the parallel Earth story and the Cybermen story.
I was going to say,
well.
I've got some notes here and I've written that down. Yeah, it doesn't quite fit together as well.
Yeah, because the first episode of this story is a parallel Earth story, and then it pivots and becomes a Cybermen story halfway through.
Yeah, basically, like there's hints of it obviously throughout, but it's only at the end where it's like, oh, okay, this is what's happening.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that in for the intrigue that it builds, it works really well in that regard. and obviously for the way it sets up the finale. But for an individual story, maybe it's not quite as blended as it could have been.
Yeah. There's a bit of a sort of a disconnect, and the thing is, you understand why they did it on the parallel universe. Because there's no way of doing a Cyberman origin story in the normal universe because Mondas is destroyed, so you know why they've had to circumnavigate it. And for what we get with the alternate universe bits of it are really good. I think actually there's some of the better bits in the story, I think. There's a lot of really great, like, there's a lot of emotional heft with those scenes. Whether it be, you know, Mickey meeting his grandmother or Rose interacting with her parents. It has a real a weight to it that I really appreciate, and I appreciate it, I think, now that I'm older.
Sure.
But even, I have to say, like, even as a kid, those scenes were very emotionally stirring and quite devastating in a number of ways. So all those things you point out, that they're well made. My criticisms are kind of different to it. Well, I'll wait, obviously, till we get through the timescales to get into it in more detail. But I'm just trying to figure out how to sort of prelude this. So look, well, the first thing I'll say is I do have fairly strong feelings about this story. But of course, it's always possible I could be swayed, and certainly I'm going to try my best to keep an open mind. There may be angles to this thing that I'm missing at this point. We'll see how it goes, getting through it.
Sure.
The other small thing I'll mention here, and this is getting slightly personal, but I'll do it anyway. So I've hinted at this, and I've skirted around this issue a little bit on the podcast previously, but I'll address it more directly now, because I think it might become relevant at the end of this podcast when we get to the end of this story. So I'm chronically ill. Have been my whole life. You know this, Cuff. Most of our friends know this about me. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that because, one, we don't have the time, and two, frankly, that's my business. But that's not. It's certainly not entirely who I am, but it is a fairly significant part of who I am and my lived experience. And I think that may be impacting how I'm viewing this story. There may be a bit of bias coming in there, but I will say that just because, you know, it's a biased perspective doesn't necessarily mean it's incorrect.
Oh no, of course not. Yeah.
I mean, and look, like there have been a lot of things I've been very, very fortunate to have in my life. Most especially, I grew up with a really loving family, which I'm eternally grateful for. I think as I get older, I realize how wonderful that is. But the fact is, yes, there are certain things that I've gone through that have been a bit full on, shall we say, to put it mildly. And I suspect that these experiences may impact how I'm sort of viewing this story. Not entirely, and we'll see how I'm able to sort of marry all of the arguments together. We'll see how that goes. But anyway, just as a proviso here, that could impact how I'm going to view some of this.
Sure.
But yeah, I just thought I'd raise that. But I'll get into the arguments in more detail because it's a surprisingly complex subject. But yeah, I'll get into that later once we've gone through the timescales and whatnot.
Cool. Well, before we get to the timescales, I think I've mentioned this in the past as well, but I'll bring it up again here because it's more important now.
Sure.
Age of Steel is actually the first Doctor Who story I ever watched. Important distinction there, not Rise of the Cybermen.
Age of Steel.
The second episode in this story.
Oh, man.
And I remember it vividly. We had... it must have been early high school. Must have been in either year 7 or 8. And I was allowed to have an old laptop up in my room because I was now in high school and had to do more homework and you know, schoolwork and all that stuff. Ordinarily, we weren't allowed electronics in our rooms apart from our old Nintendo DSs. That obviously that didn't stop other people wanting to use it. Most notably, my sister, who liked to borrow it from time to time to watch shows. She would most she would more often than not take it back to her room for a bit when I wasn't using it, but this one occasion she kept it in my room and she watched this episode of Doctor Who, and I was also watching it. I presume she must have watched part 1 beforehand, and for some reason chose to watch episode 2 away from that. I don't think this was in the same year the show was coming out. So you can imagine, you've seen this 2-part story a bunch of times now. Can you imagine watching the second episode of this without having any context of not just part 1, but of the show itself?
Yeah, it would have been pretty wild.
Yeah, it was very, very confusing. And also, you know vaguely what kind of... well, I'll say this. I have quite a lot of siblings, all of which are younger than me. And as a result, whenever we did a movie from like the video shop with dinner or something like that, we would always have to cater to the sensibilities of the youngest around the room. And so watching this episode was the first time I've ever like been exposed to subject matter as dark as this. And you can imagine it was a bit of a shock for poor, frail, young me.
Oh, God, that must have been... Whew.
Yep. It got to the point, like, when it gets to the end sequence and all the Cybermen are, blowing up because they've got their emotions back.
Yeah.
But also having established, and the episode does a lot to establish, that they are people with thoughts.
Yeah, no, they make that very, very clear.
Yep. And even as all that was going down, I distinctly remember turning to my sister and going, "But they're going to be okay, right?" Because that's what I was used to. That's what I was used to from fiction at that. I was used to like everything is wrapped up in a neat little bow. Everyone's okay. There's no consequences. It's all just like, the bad guys got what they deserve. The good guys get what they deserve, and no innocent bystanders are put in harm's way at any point. This was something else.
Yeah, it's like thematically, I think, and tonally certainly, it is fairly consistent with Doctor Who, because even back in the classic series when it was a little bit hokey and a bit silly, there were dark moments. We'll be discussing this when we talk about our next classic story, Horror of Fang Rock.
Yep.
But I find it very funny, but like I don't know, I kind of identify with having that shock to the system moment that you may have had.
Oh yeah.
Because I had a similar sort of background, because I've got several siblings as well, and I'm second eldest, so it wasn't exactly like that, but that experience of that shock to the system was like, oh, right, this is a thing that people do, is it? This is we're really going there. Alrighty. Yay. But yeah, like that feeling, I can certainly understand that. And it's pretty full on, honestly.
Oh yeah.
And we'll get into quite a bit of detail of how it all sort of fits together, or does it well. We'll see. But the point is, there's a lot of obviously darker sci-fi themes, which I do admire the show for really confronting, and doing it in a pretty good way. More than that, though, there's other scenes, and I mean, granted, this bit I think is only in the first part, but like there's straight up horror trappings in this story. Yeah, like let's not beat around the bush about that.
No, 100%. Yeah.
Whether it's the fucking the
tunnels,
the wonderfully cruelly ironic scene where all the innocent victims are getting lured into Willy Wonka's factory of nightmares, where they basically get treated like cattle. They get chopped to bits by a really freaky mad scientist Tim Burton death metal looking device, while they play fucking The Lion Sleeps Tonight in a cruelly ironic fashion. That's it's pretty fucked, honestly. It was, I think, even as a kid, it was fairly shocking, and and it's funny, like I say, the device they've got looks very death metal. Granted, I'm saying that because I'm a fan of death metal, but being older and like sort of appreciating sort of darker art like that, I never realized, oh, wow, that's eerily similar. That's very disturbing. They really went there. Okay. So yeah, I think that reaction, that shock to the system reaction, that's pretty fair. I'm not gonna lie. And it's funny, but there are other examples too. Like I remember, when I was a kid, my mum went to Europe, I think for a few months, and she went to the UK, and she came back with a couple of Doctor Who DVDs, surprisingly. One of them was The Curse of Fenric, which was a Seventh Doctor story. That story, because keep in mind, I was only about 9, 8, 9, I think, when I saw it. That story scared me so much that I think I just stopped watching it for years. That story scared the shit out of me. Granted, that's probably because it was in Doctor Who's scariest era, I would argue, but that's a whole other topic. The point is, yes, the shock to the system moments, the behind the sofa moments, I think is many Who fans would call them. They're part and parcel of Doctor Who and really always have been.
100%, yeah.
So that reaction that you had, yep, that makes sense.
Well, I remember it wasn't much later on that I had the same situation when she watched Blink in my room.
Ooh. Yeah, I can imagine.
Let's jump to the timescales before we go.
Yeah, sure.
So these two episodes, they're ranked differently on. They each have their own different page in the timescales, but the ratings are eerily similar. So both stories, with about 210 votes each, have a 6.9 average rating. For me, that's way too low.
I had a feeling. I'm honestly might put it a bit lower than that, because again, we don't do things by halves. So
yeah,
like I'd say probably a 6, and again, I'll get to what that's about. But yeah, like, and I'm also not surprised that you think that's a bit low, because I knew that you already were quite fond of this episode before going into it. So yeah.
These stories, they sit around the... see if this makes sense. In terms of their rankings among other 10th Doctor stories, they're at about the top half of the bottom half. They're sandwiched between the Christmas Invasion and The End of Time Part 1.
Right. I mean, well, look, my main concern, again, which I'll get to, is more a thematic thing. But I think in terms of the technical qualities of it, the plot, pacing, dialogue, all of that, I think it's better than the Christmas Invasion on those levels.
It's better than both. Christmas Invasion is pretty good. End of Time Part 1 is a mess. It's all over the place.
Yeah, I remember I watched it last year. There's like moments in it that seemed alright, but it was only really in Part 2 where it really started to come together. Part 1's a bit
100%.
Really is very much all over the place.
Yep.
That was a very strange episode. So anyway.
So the episodes have, I'm going to average them out, a 7.2 for plot.
I might put that a little higher, honestly. The plot is one of the better parts, and it all
yeah, it's strong. There are a lot of moving parts in Part 1, and they all sort of collide in Part 2 in a satisfying enough way. Maybe not thematically, but the stuff that they set up in Part 1 all comes back around to by the conclusion. And
there's a lot of sort of kind of hairpin turn moments. There's a lot of really tense scenes. A lot of sort of thrills. Even without the nostalgia factor, the way the story is constructed, what it's trying to do, but the plot is doing it fairly effectively. So yeah, I mean, I'd go a little bit higher than that, honestly.
I agree as well. It's got about a 7.7 for acting combined, which again I think is also a bit low. I mean, I don't think anyone's doing a bad performance. Noel Clarke's turning in his best performance as Mickey/Ricky so far. A lot of the background actors can be a bit hokey in their deaths. especially in part 1 when a lot of the electrocutions don't really they're not really well acted, those bits, but the main cast are doing a good job.
I think, yeah, and even some of the background actors, like, I don't mind that some of the acting is a little bit hokey personally, and most of the other ones, like, they're doing what they need to do.
Yeah.
Well enough, and certainly the main cast, even like someone like Mr. Crane, has quite a good performance. So yeah, I'd honestly put that a little bit higher as well.
They've got a 7.5 for effects.
Yeah, I mean, the practical effects are pretty damn good. The cyber suits always look great.
Yeah.
But you can definitely tell, like, those, the big sort of backwards tracking shots when you're seeing all the Cybermen machines, churning away. You can tell it's mid-2000s CGI. It's not terrible. It doesn't ruin it for me, but, like, yeah, it's...
I mean, there've certainly been worse effects used.
Oh yeah, no. They've been worse. You can tell that this is 2006. I really do appreciate though that one shot where you again see the freaky death metal machine churning away, but then it's got the cyber mask sort of coming towards the screen. I appreciate that even from a sort of imagery and directing standpoint that they were able to do that, and knowing that you couldn't. It would have been way more difficult to pull that off with practical effects. So the fact that they tried to do that, even if it's not as successful as they want it to be, is quite admirable and even enjoyable when seeing it. So yeah, I mean, I think that's fairly fair for special effects. They don't interfere with the story when it really counts. Yeah, like when we see the Cybermen, they're all with practical effects. Even like the cyber controller suit is nice and unique and weird. He's got the lit up glass brain thing, which is really cool. So yeah, I think 7.5 is fairly fair.
7.1 for replay value.
This is where I would disagree a little bit. It definitely was worse compared to when I saw it as a kid.
Sure.
And it got progressively worse the first few times I watched it, and then I watched it yesterday, and it got like slightly better, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, no matter what, it's integral to like the series as a whole.
Oh yeah,
it's incredibly crucial to set up the finale of this season. So
yeah,
it's required viewing regardless.
Yeah, and I think most of my problems with it are like just with these two individual episodes.
Yeah.
Not with how it fits in to the greater scheme of things. Because frankly, even if I have a lot of problems with this, one, it doesn't make it like a full-blown bad story for a start, and secondly, even if it did, I'm still glad it's here to introduce the Cybermen for a revival audience, because it's really important.
Yeah.
That it did that.
And this next part is where the two episodes differ slightly. So the first episode has 23 out of 97 people say that the story requires a previous. And for the second episode, that number bumps up to 100 out of 107. Now, I don't know who the 7 people are that say Age of Steel stands up without watching a previous episodes, but I am living proof that is not the case. I was very confused. I remember very much for the first time I watched it. But 23 out of 97 for like the story as a whole, I'm gonna say. Look, you need to know about Rose and her family history in order for the Pete stuff to properly land. In addition, because this episode is kind of a big departure from Doctor Who, where it's like, parallel Earth for perhaps the first time, you do kind of need to be familiar with the basic format of a standard episode to know that something like this is out of the ordinary.
Yeah. I mean, they make it fairly clear that that's the case, but you still need, that context.
Yeah.
Because even, like, the companions are saying, oh, well, yeah, it's like the TARDIS. It can travel wherever it wants, can't it? So, and again, like, the Doctor does explain why that's not true anymore, but you still want that context, I think.
Yeah.
To just really sort of hammer home the qualities of, like, what it means to be in an alternate reality and how that impacts the characters.
Yeah. I suppose we'll just get stuck into the main discussion right now. I do want to briefly figure out with you, has Doctor Who in like the classic series, have they tackled parallel realities before this point?
Yes.
Okay.
They did it once. there is a fairly famous John Pertwee story, which we really should look at some point, because as far as I'm aware, it's pretty well received.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Inferno, and the Doctor goes to an alternate reality that's similar to his, but still different. So basically, if I remember it correctly, the alternate reality he goes to is a fascist republic.
Ooh.
Where the brigadier is replaced by a guy called the brigade leader, who's basically just a nastier version of the brigadier with an eye patch.
Uh-huh.
And all the characters are all basically villains. They're doing the same experiment they're doing back in the Doctor's reality. So what the Doctor does is he uses that knowledge to prevent a disaster that's likely to happen in his reality, because they're doing the same things and taking dangerous risks. I think they're trying to burrow into the earth, and I think there's a risk of like a volcano or nuclear explosion happening, and there's also the experiments that they're doing in this alternate reality are creating sort of like almost Wolfman looking monsters. So yeah,
right.
Like I even remember years ago when I saw it on the ABC. There's this one bit where the Doctor comes back and they ask him, "Well, where have you been, Doctor?" And he said, "Same time, same place, but different dimension."
Oh, fascinating.
So
okay.
yeah, so it's definitely been done before.
Cool. I just looked it up. That story is the single highest rated Third Doctor story on the timescales.
We'll definitely have to check it out then.
Yep. And despite the fact that it features fascism involved, again, politics.
Nothing serious, nothing political.
No. It's not like getting politics involved leads to the single highest and well-regarded Third Doctor story in the 70s. Look, we've had a huge recording break. We had to do that at some point.
We did.
It's been a while for us. I know people might be starting to get sick of us doing that constantly, but it just feels like the only way to hammer that point home how misinformed the other side is.
Fuck it. Well, we are going to continue to do that.
Cool. Okay, great.
It's going to be our shtick.
If you're unapologetic, I won't be. But it's this is I would hazard a guess that this is like the most that this show has like explored parallel worlds up to this point. Apart from Inferno, and by the sounds of things, it's like a small part of Inferno that deals with parallel worlds. Like this entire story practically is based on one.
You could argue because Inferno is longer. I think it's 7 episodes long actually, which is quite big. So it is, I think, quite a major part of the story, but it's not explored. I don't think it's certainly not in the same way that it is here.
Sure.
There's more of a human impact.
Right.
Because while, it's obviously a shock to the system for the Doctor to realize, oh, why are all my friends awful people now? It's not quite. It doesn't carry the same emotional heft as, oh, hey, Mum, you should give Dad a second chance. Don't you dare talk to me. You're just the staff. Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's Well, I suppose we'll talk about the parallel world stuff.
Sure.
While we're on this topic, it's interesting how. Well, I mean, you always come across this when you deal with parallel world stuff, but like the different versions of the same people, and you can see, especially when there are big differences, but you can still see the same person underneath. I'm mainly talking about Jackie here. Camille Kodurica does a great job in this alternate version of Jackie. It's interesting to see like how Pete's success would have caused Jackie to become just a horrible person, like spoiled,
self-centered,
deluded,
very classist in her own way.
Very classist, yeah. But the idea that it's like, I'm not 40. Well, I am, but I want everyone to think I'm 39. But everyone knows that she's 40 anyway, and just goes along with it.
And I'll tell you something else that's interesting. And I think I only noticed this yesterday. But that first scene where she shows up, it's in a way kind of similar to Father's Day, because the contempt she shows for Pete is kind of like how she used to view him, as rather unsettling as that was.
Yeah.
But it kind of lures the audience into a false sense of security, so it's like, oh, I guess it is the same. But then it turns out, no, her reasons for being sort of that mean-spirited are far more disturbing than, Pete just being, I don't know, kind of a failure, I guess. Like, no, she's actually a really self-centered person. It's really chilling.
Well, you can almost see the progression that the character would have taken, and assuming that the start of their relationship was very similar, where it's like, you don't have any ambition, everything you do is a failure, and how are you going to provide for this family when none of the stuff you do works, and then when his stuff does start to work, but she's still stuck in the pattern of treating him like that, so then she would sort of progress into this state. I'm gonna say really naturally, and like also really sadly for Pete. Poor guy can't catch a break. But yeah, I think it's also get Sean Dingwall's back as Pete. He does a great job once again.
Yeah, he's quite good.
Yeah, I mean it's a shocking look, especially it's culture shock for Rose certainly. Because when she is talking to Jackie out on the balcony about, he's a good man, he deserves another shot, I can imagine that talk working on her Jackie.
Yeah.
But
not this one.
No, certainly not. And I think that's a big part of Rose's story in this episode, which is, seeing, okay, these are different people.
Yeah, well, and this is sort of how sort of effective the writing is, especially on this point, because again, similarly to that opening scene with Jackie, we're lured into a false sense of security because it's like, oh, yeah, my mum loves her cup of tea, she never goes to bed without it too, and then it all just gets ripped away from the audience instantly. And that one really chilling moment when Jackie just looks at Rose with these terrifying, ice cold eyes, and I'm like, man, that's fucked up. That is definitely. Really, really fucked. Like, just the inability, I think, for anybody to really cope with that moment, like just the visceral shock would be overwhelming. Yeah, like that was. I think even as a kid, I found that chilling, and I sort of kind of understood the dynamics of it.
A lot of really solid early establishing dialogue as well. When she's talking to Pete before the party, like diamond-studded earpods, and where's my Zeppelin? It's a lot of Veruca Salt level dialogue before that point.
What is it? She says, like, I've got someone from Reykjavik getting the flowers, and you're just giving me whatever you bought from the £2 store or something like that.
Yeah.
So they make it very clear who these characters are.
Well, especially like when we see Jackie again at the end of the story, like our Jackie, and like such the different, like our Jackie perfectly content in her little council flat on the Powell estate. Meanwhile, alternate reality Jackie's living in this magnificent, huge, massive mansion, and she's still not satisfied. It's really like it's fascinating, like how people who have nothing can be content, or comparatively at least can be content with what they've got, and yet people who have everything just want more and more. That's right, I'm calling out the rich. I'm not afraid to do so. They're not listening anyway.
I don't blame you for calling out the rich at all. I think having like too much money, like it basically just rots your brain, because it makes you. I think it makes people just sort of, I don't know, like not have to think about the consequences of the words and actions, I guess.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that dunking on the rich like that's completely fine.
Another thing that this that seeing this parallel world gets us to do, weirdly, is learn about Mickey's past for the first time. He goes to see his grandmother, and it's through a conversation with the doctor and Rose that we learn quite a lot about his past before Rose. His mum couldn't cope, his dad ran off, so he was raised by his grandmother, and she sort of fell down the stairs, broke her neck some time ago. And it's such a shame, because I don't think that scene with him seeing Ricky's grandmother, I'm going to say, is powerful. I think it's largely due to the performances of the characters, but I think it would have been so much more powerful if we had gotten to know Mickey to this level before this point.
Yeah,
and,
I'd agree,
it's a shame that this episode does... The best thing this episode does is something that the show waited too long to do, and it's start giving Mickey some goddamn respect. Like, Jesus Christ, this is his departure story, and he's finally getting to do something.
Being more than the tin dog, which he actually mentions in the episode.
Well, that's also, like, just in general, I think the best thing this episode does is give Mickey a massive spotlight. I don't think it's
a very Mickey episode.
It's certainly not a coincidence that, apart from, like, our thing, Mickey is, like, the only person who deals with anything in the resolution. He's the one that takes down the transmitter. He's the one that figures out the key to the emotional inhibitor, and he's also the one that flies the Zeppelin to get the Doctor and Rose out of there. That's it's so deliberate. Giving Mickey this massive win is what lets him realize his role in this triangle, the TARDIS triangle. That's what helps him realize, I'm not just the tin dog, I'm not Mickey the idiot. I can be more, and I am more, and I'm gonna abandon this toxic relationship and be my own person. Like he says to Jake at the end, I'm not Ricky, I'm my own person.
Yeah. It's in a way, having that contrast to Ricky that really helps with that.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like I think it's part of like seeing what he could be. And by the end of the season, we're gonna get a version of Mickey that is, I think, somewhere in the middle. He's not as incompetent as original Mickey, but he's not as aggro as Ricky.
Yeah, for sure. Like even near the end, where the Doctor's basically saying to him through coded language how to fix the problem. There's a nice. It's obviously kind of backhanded, but there's a nice sort of camaraderie there, and it's like the Doctor is sort of apologizing for how he's treated Mickey a little bit over the last while. So
he calls Mickey
very satisfying in that sense.
He calls Mickey the idiot over the comm to get his attention. But then a lot of the dialogue that he's using, it's like I said, it's respect. It's like the Doctor going like, "You've got this, Mickey. You can do this. Go for it. Show me what you got." And he does, absolutely, and it's really great to see.
Yeah, and it works because even with the with his previous characterization, it works out because he's the one who the Doctor has to sort of coach through to divert the nukes in World War III. So the fact that they've sort of tapped into that and expanding on it really, progressing it is really good. Yeah,
it doesn't come out of nowhere like it can do sometimes. That being said, I always love it, especially like this happens a lot in the mid-2000s where a character like demonstrates a skill that they've never had before and they attribute it to video games. Where'd you learn to fly a Zeppelin? PlayStation. Yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah.
You've never played a goddamn video game in your life, have you, writers?
All those hours clocking and Gran Turismo. God, that sounds terrible.
Oh, Gran Turismo,
Yep, that totally prepared me for my driving lessons. It wasn't like my instructor had to say, no, this isn't a video game.
I played a lot of Croc Legend of the Gobbos on PS1, and as a result, I can fly a Zeppelin. The skills are transferable.
My brother used to play Croc a lot. Awesome. Anyway, that's a whole other thing.
Yep. That's really the only part of the finale that I feel like they kind of pull out of their ass. Because, Mickey being able to fly a Zeppelin is a bit... It's fine for what it is, but it's quite a funny hand wave that they do to get away from it.
Sure.
I'll throw it in here because it's on my mind. Rose gets captured or trapped, number 14.
Yeah, is that when they're all? Remind me exactly what that moment is, because they're.
It's when the Cybermen figure out they don't have their earpods working.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah.
But a part of me is also like, okay, what was their plan exactly? Like the Pete and Rose's plan in that situation. Like they're pretending that they've been assimilated by the AirPods to get into the factory, and from there they're going to find Rose. But they get to like literally next in line to be converted, and they're still just like marching along with the crowd. Like, I don't understand what the plan was from them. So they assumed that they were going to find Jackie in this massive like conveyor line of people and then grab her and escape. Is that what the plan was?
I could have sworn there was something more to that, because it's her and Pete. Yeah, they're both in. I may be misremembering this, but I feel like when they're in the truck, there's like some conversation of what they were ultimately going to do there. I mean, I know that Pete wanted to go and see Jackie, but I feel like there was something more. But perhaps I'm wrong.
Well, I think a lot of the plans for the factory are fleshed out when they're at the factory itself, because that's the bit when the Doctor once again forgets about Mickey, and Mickey has to finally go, you know, I'm not an idiot, I'm not this tin dog, I can help. And that's when they flash out their plans, and that's when Pete and Rose get the dummy earpods to put in to help them pretend to be part of the crowd. But I guess they were just they just assumed that they would just find Jackie
and then just go
and then just run. Yeah. But like, surely.
But even then, that wouldn't have really worked. It's not as if the Cybermen wouldn't have caught them if they.
Well, the place was swarming with Cybermen, but also they must have known that Jackie had gone in well before them by that point, right? Like, I don't know if they figured out.
Doesn't even the Doctor say that she's basically dead at this point?
Well, yeah, that's very early on. That's in like episode 1.
Oh yeah, in episode 1. So
they're trying to lead Pete out of the house.
Yeah, so like it's obviously that element of her very likely being converted into a Cyberman has obviously been established,
or potentially electrocuted.
Yeah, or potentially
very
electrocuted.
Early on. Yeah.
So it's not. And, like, it makes sense that Pete still wants to go after her. I mean,
definitely.
His wife, of course. But, it doesn't really sort of come out as effectively as they want.
Well, yeah, but because my thinking was like, okay, they put the AirPods on to help them get in. But then once they're in, they find a moment where no Cybermen's eyes are on them, and then they sort of sneak away, rather than just continuing to walk until they're literally next in line to go into the processing machines. By that point, it's way too late. By that point, you're in the heart of Cyberman country, and you're surrounded on all sides. Surely you find your moment to sneak away, and then you can do a little espionage action to see if you can spot Jackie elsewhere.
Right.
But it does lead to the really great scene of the Cyberman who was Jackie revealing themselves to Pete in order to get them to lower their guard and show emotion, and then go, whoop, they're fake, and then like they walk away and lose Jackie and can't remember which one she was because they all look the same. Just such a like a small scene, but so emblematic of what the Cybermen are. Yeah,
very, very, very effective, and the fact that they only understand emotion as something to exploit in others, which is can lead to really good and potent scenes, as is demonstrated also in Earthshock.
Yeah,
when
100%.
The cyber leaders basically got taken for ransom.
Yep.
So yeah, powerful stuff. It's good that they included it.
Definitely. We're talking about Rose. I might as well get this over with now. There's a lot more to talk about with the episode besides, but we're on the topic, so I'll bring it up slightly earlier than I normally do.
Okay.
Quite a lot of Rose in this story. I don't mind. You know, like I'm expecting you to get to. I'm expecting what you're thinking is for me to be annoyed at Rose constantly, but going, I need to see Pete, and the Doctor going, that's not your dad, and her going, but I need to see him.
Actually, no. I think I was sort of on similar wavelengths in that if you're going to criticize her for anything, that's not going to to be it, because it's 100%. Understandable that she wants to see her dad, and the way that she's treated by her parents, like it's.
Yeah.
Full on.
Well, yeah, that too. But it's also another one of those situations where I can imagine a viewer at home going, why aren't you listening to the Doctor? I would be listening to him. And then I say to them, shut up. You don't know how you'd react in that situation because you've never been in that situation. You know, if you're presented with a dead relative and an alternate reality, of course curiosity would get the better of you and you'd want to see them. Like that to me, fine. No dramas there.
Sure.
And for me, like, the majority of my main problems with Rose, first of all, she does nothing to help solve the problem again. she has, once again, she's not taking any initiative. She just gets told what to do and does it. Not a great track record.
There was one bit where, like, what was it? I think it's when she was with Mrs. Moore and the doctor, and someone was coming up with ideas about like how to solve the problem, and I thought, wouldn't have this been better if a companion was speaking them? Like, why is Rose? Yeah, I don't know.
But all the other moments that I have an issue with Rose in this story are admittedly small, and they're scenes that in isolation would be nothing, but once again are emblematic of the whole larger picture. Problems.
Yeah, sure.
The first, I've written down two specifically that I remembered,
right.
And they're both from episode 1 of this story.
Sure.
The first one is when Rose is talking about Mickey's grandmother, and it's a line that, again, I don't think had this intention when it was written, but out of context speaks to larger issues. She's talking about Mickey's grandmother and laughing about her. She's reminiscing and going, "Oh yeah, she was great." The line verbatim is, "Such a great woman. She used to slap him."
You slap him and ha ha ha. Yeah.
Yeah, and laughing about it.
Yeah.
And one, finds corporal punishment hilarious, but two, given the way Rose has treated Mickey across this season, come on.
Yeah, boy. If you thought that was problematic, get ready for when we talk about the Idiot's Lantern. That's a whole other thing. But...
well, at least in Idiot's Lantern, they bring that stuff up with they know that it's a bad thing.
Do they? No, we'll get to that. That's a whole other topic. But anyway.
Oh, that's true. There is the ending of that episode.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
For the most part, it condones corporal punishment as a very bad thing. Here, our main character is like, haha, so funny. My boyfriend used to get beaten by his relative.
Yeah. And look, it's just one of those things that similarly with a lot of stuff with Doctor Who that. It just hasn't aged well. And as I've said numerous times...
His physical abuse as a child makes it okay for me to emotionally abuse him as an adult.
Well, look, like that line, specifically, it's one of the things where, as I've said before, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but obviously that looks uncomfortable in any one lens. And as I've said, we've just got to be honest about it. This is... Obviously that looks kind of icky.
Sure.
So... And I was actually thinking of bringing up that line, but I'm kind of glad that you brought it up because I'd wondered how to sort of slot it into the conversation. But yeah, understandably, it's an uncomfortable line in any sort of modern lens.
Yeah. There are a couple more moments. When Rose and the Doctor are posing as kitchen staff, and the Doctor does this whole, if you want information, work in the kitchen.
Is this? I know what you're gonna say.
Oh,
I was thinking about this yesterday.
When the Doctor says the word Lucy, and Rose is immediately like, "Huh? Who's Lucy? Competition? What?"
Well, maybe. I thought. Oh, this is an angry cuff moment, isn't it?
Well, it's such a blatant example of literally anytime the Doctor doesn't even show interest in another female character, just mentions a female character's name, Rose immediately goes, "Huh? I hate her already." And that's exemplified when it's like, Lucy said that man is the president, and Rose goes, "What, president, not prime minister?"
Well, maybe Lucy's
just a bit thick.
Yeah.
The codependence is showing. It's really bad.
Yeah, and the thing is, again, I know I've said...
Sorry, just real quick.
No, it's alright, go ahead.
Martha's entire character arc and growth is about someone who's infatuated with the Doctor who doesn't get a look in otherwise. Not even she is that jealous, or as jealous as Rose is. And Martha has a reason to be jealous. The Doctor in Martha's run mentions Rose fucking constantly.
Right.
And Martha, only once or twice I can think of, shows outward signs of hostility.
Right.
And the first time she meets Rose is he found you, that's amazing. Not jealous at all, albeit she's gone through her growth by that stage. Here, once again, like, it's not even a character that we ever see speak to the Doctor on screen. It's not like the Doctor's, like, talking with her.
Yeah, we never see this Lucy character at all.
Yeah, it's not like we ever see, like, the Doctor talking to Lucy, gathering information, and Lucy's, like, showing interest and, like, quasi-flirting with him, and then we get a shot of Rose watching on. No. It's literally just like, she hears the Doctor say a girl's name, and instantly goes, oh, what's this then? Why haven't you been talking to me? I'm a woman, I'm right here. Which then factors in to the way the episode ends. Which is a very triumphant moment for Mickey, when he takes charge of his own story. He works out what he wants to do, and is set on that path. He's like, okay, I'm leaving. I'm doing my own thing now. I'm getting away from it all. And then Rose has the audacity to cry about it. And treat this as if he's breaking up with her, even though we all know that mentally Rose has been broken up with Mickey in her mind for ages. We know this. It's evident. And yet Rose still has the gall to say, but what if I need you, Mickey?
Yeah.
Motherfucker, where was any of this affection when it actually counted, Rose? It's once again, like, now that you're leaving me, it's the child and a toy mentality. As soon as someone else has that toy, or as soon as I can't have that toy anymore, now I need that toy more than anything. And if this was, like, an actual, like, if the Rose and Mickey relationship was, like, in any way stronger, or in any way equal, or in any way shown to be a good relationship, his decision to leave would be heartbreaking for their dynamic, and it would be something that, we would be split about, and it would be like, okay, I guess he's doing the right thing, but it sucks for them. Here, it's nothing but a victory. Rose finally, like, despite having supposedly learned the lesson in Boomtown to start treating Mickey right, has not done that whatsoever. Start of the episode, he's left holding a button down on the TARDIS for half an hour, and Rose laughs about it, which, again, on its own is nothing, but when taking the whole series as a whole, emblematic of the way that Mickey's had his face held down in the mud for, 18 episodes by this point, before finally taking charge. And now, when he finally starts to improve as a person and get out of this horrible dynamic, she has the gall to be sad about it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, again, as I said, it doesn't bother me like it bothers you, but that all does, kind of make sense. And, like, you could argue, oh, well, like, there's a reason why they're doing this, because there's a context for this, but then when you sort of pull back and you realise, oh, the context is how this season's going to end, and that's not particularly great either, so, yeah... I can understand why that bothered you, and I knew, like I said, it's just so funny, like, but watching it, I'm like, here's the moment Cuff's gonna bring up. It was just very funny.
I know, but like, it's if Rose had like been a mature adult, and instead of making it all about her, like acknowledging the situation and just going, I'm sorry for how I treated you, then it would have been one thing. But the fact that she still sees the people around her purely as things to give her what she wants. It's not like Rose says, "But I need you." She says, "But what if I need you?"
Right.
Like, think about that for a second.
Yeah.
It's not, "But what we have is so good, I don't want you to leave." It's, "Oh, but maybe at some point in the future, the Doctor won't be there, and at that point, I'll just go running back to you at that point."
Sure.
Yes. I don't know. Like, and I understand that, like, it can be tough listening to a lot of the rants that I have about Rose if the things that I'm ranting about aren't things that, like, affect someone else's gutturally as they do me. And I'm sure there are people in the audience who are going, okay, we get it, you hate Rose, move on, talk about something else. But like for me, this is almost like I've had these opinions for years, and
oh yeah, no, and look, to be fair, in terms of like not on this issue, but that the basic principle of sort of holding on to vitriol. I mean, I'm certainly like that with Moffat. I mean, I know that I got a bit, I mean, I know you were joking, but you weren't entirely wrong to point out that I was being, I don't know, slightly grinchy when we were looking at the girl in the fireplace. Well, but the fact is, those feelings I've had them since my late teens. So
yeah, and I think a lot of your issues with Girl in the Fireplace weren't unfounded. And I think that a lot of your issues with that are similar to a lot of my issues with Rose in this, where it's like on their own in isolation, they're
not as bad, but when you put them together,
yeah, when you're looking at the larger picture, and it's like all of these small annoyances that on their own don't mean much, but when you add them all up, they're emblematic of something much, much bigger. And at that point, it's like, oh, okay, no, I hate this now. It's that kind of, it's that principle.
Yeah. No, that does make sense. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm done talking about Rose, unless you have anything to respond with to any of the stuff that I've said.
No, I don't think so. I mean, again, maybe like the level of vitriol you have for Rose in maybe in general, and even with this episode, I don't know if I see it as entirely justified. But you do like your points; they do stand fairly well, I think. And some of the shittier things that she does, she still like does them. Yeah, like they're in the episode. And I'll be interested to see how I feel at the end of the season, because I know some of these issues get intensified with that ending.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think the one thing I will say that you've sort of been able to sway me on is, even if I don't think that Rose is like a particularly bad character, I do think she's overrated. Now, part of that is because, as you've pointed out, characters like Martha are underrated. Even from memory, Martha was a really good character. But yeah, I think she's a bit overrated, and I don't understand that much when people say, oh yeah, like she's, my second favorite companion in the Revival series. I'm like, really? I'm pretty sure Donna was more interesting, Martha was more interesting. I'm not even a massive fan of the Moffat era, and some of his companions were kind of more interesting. So yeah, that at least you've been able to sway me on this journey we've taken over the last year or so. So yeah, that's what I have to say on that.
Should we finally talk about the Cybermen?
Yes. This is the I think the biggest issue I have for me, or at least the broader themes and thematic implications that are a part of it. Sure. I'm just wondering where to inject that in. I'm happy if you want to gush about them for a little bit, but
sure. Well, I assume that a lot of the stuff that you might take issue with has to do with Lumic as a villain, and
yes, but a little bit more than that. But yes, that's one of them.
Sure, I think we'll get to Lumic after we discuss the Cybermen broadly.
Sure. Yeah, like there's quite a bit more to it than that, but I'm happy to like do a little bit of a more beginning discussion of the Cybermen themselves.
Well, actually, it's tough because I think their origins, are in this at least, are so closely tied to Lumic as a character. From my understanding, in the classic era, a whole point of the Cybermen is about survival. It's about adapting to survive, the next step, and a lot of that stuff is present here. Lumic as a character, first of all, fantastic performance. He's unhinged. He's a psychopath, but he's still he's able to get across that kind of stuff while still portraying the inherent intelligence in the character.
Yeah, he's almost got kind of a Bond villain quality, but it's a little more serious than that. And and he's pretty good at doing that, and even the madness in him. He's good at portraying even some of the more subtle qualities in in the way that manifests. So that's really great. I can't remember for the life of me what's the name of the actor. Help me out here.
I looked it up and then forgot it. Hang on, I'll bring it up now. But while I'm doing that, the theme of him, I'm dying, and in order to survive, I've created this thing.
Yeah, sure.
and now I'm sort of as a form of megalomania, I suppose, rolling this out worldwide, forcing everyone else to get the upgrade as well. And I think there is some kind of hypocrisy to that, where like even in the moment he's converting all of London. Roger Lloyd Pack is the name of the actor.
Oh, wow, I didn't realize that was his name. I thought it was something completely different. But anyway, good old Owen from Victor Dibley.
But there's the hypocrisy of, you know, he's converting all of London, and then even after his life support systems have been damaged, he's like, I'm not ready for it yet.
Yeah.
You know, he's fully aware of what the process is. Yeah. And he's clearly got the mentality of, I'm gonna do it for everyone else because I don't want to be alone in this, but I'm not gonna have it done personally until the very last minute.
Yeah.
Because he knows it's a bad thing, but his like he's at first I think it's a case of him like, I'm going to cling to life by any means necessary, and this is it.
Yeah.
But if I'm going down, I'm taking everyone with me, which is a great mentality for a villain, but I suspect not an amazing character choice for someone who's being depicted as chronically ill, which I imagine is where some of your criticisms might come.
Yes, that is some of it. Again, there's a lot more to it than that, but yes, that's kind of part of it.
Well, it would be somewhat similar to, you know, a work of fiction. I'm not claiming this is a parallel to anything in particular, because I can't think of anything where this has come up before. But something like, hey, here's our only gay character in this entire story. Oh, and they're the main villain.
Yeah. It's, again, fair bit more complicated than that, but yes, that's one of them. It's like, I don't need to know what the details of this project are, Lumik. We're not doing it, and fuck you, even if you're chronically ill and dying. You know, who cares?
Well, you know,
I'm the president. Damn it!
Look, in that situation, I can imagine that they've tried other things before.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine it's like a, you know, I've done this thing, and because of that, we're not going to help you in any conceivable way.
Yeah, like, it's just kind of strange, I think, that, like, because you assume the implication is that they have discussed this at length, but we don't see any of that at length discussion, and again, I'll get into more of that shortly, but yes, you're sort of, you're getting close to hitting the nail on the head in terms of some of the issues that show up. So, yeah.
The Cybermen themselves, though, while we're on the topic, I think this is a fantastic introduction for a revival era. There are obviously elements of the character or the creature that have been lost in adaptation for this new version of the Cybermen. There's a small element of the body horror still there. That I think that element, when it's pronounced, is probably the strongest part of their characterization, when they actually delve into these are people, and we have to block off the emotions because it hurts them too much to retain them.
Realize their own form.
Yeah, exactly. Those parts of the story, when it gets down to that in the second half of episode 2, like the conversation the Doctor and Mrs. Moore have with I think her name is Sally.
Sally Phelan.
Sally Phelan, as she's recalling herself on her deathbed. It's a very stirring conversation if the dialogue can be a bit on the
really
nose.
Full on. And that is one of the better elements in this story.
It
doesn't... I don't think it, cures the problems that I have with it, but it's a bit of a remedy to it, which is quite good.
Yeah, in terms of this design of the Cybermen, it's not my favourite, I'll be honest. I prefer...
Is your favourite, like, Nightmare in Silver? Is that your favourite, or...?
Well, that's one of my favourite Cybermen stories in general, but I'm not sure... I'm not even sure if that design I particularly enjoy, because I think that design looks way too much like Iron Man for its own good.
Yeah.
I think I favour something like... I mean, it's going to be strange to say, but I think it's the Cybermen design from the Chibnall era, because I think that one does a really good job blending the modern with the retro.
The different elements.
Yeah. At least for that version of the Cybermen. If you for other interpretations, I think a lot of the classic era designs are quite strong. I haven't yet seen. Well, even the Mondasian Cybermen design from the end of Capaldi's era is really, really solid for what it is.
Yeah, well, even the original is quite
yeah.
It's quite interesting. It is a little bit hokey. They've got their weapons are like these boxes they carry around, like on their belly. So it's very strange. But the face has such a fucking terrifying, uncanny valley quality to it.
Definitely.
You just look at it and it's like, oh god, no. Get that away from me. Go away from me, Slipknot mask. Get back to the horror movie section, please.
Yeah, the old Cybermen designs are quite good at really getting across visually what the Cybermen are supposed to be. I think there's a reason why whenever a new companion encounters the Cybermen in Revival era Who, they have to keep specifying, look, they're not robots. I know they look like really like they're robots. They're not.
But they're not.
I would like to see a new Cybermen design at some point really nail that
the
dichotomy.
Human quality.
Yeah, well, even just like blending the two, like even better than the current Chibnall design did, where it's like still getting across that they're in these exosuits for their own survival because that's the best way to get around, but still portraying outwardly the humanity of it all.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think
you land somewhere in the middle, and I think you have the perfect Cybermen design. And it's also handy just because the Cybermen are constantly upgrading in order to survive and adapting.
Yeah, they can change. They're not like the Daleks, which have to remain the same.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the constant redesigning of the Cybermen is baked into their mythos, which is quite
sure.
It's handy when that just happens.
Yeah.
But I think they're a really solid foe for this story. I think it's certainly it's eerie when you see the people sort of blank and mindless walking towards their own demise,
their own dooms.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that image alone makes the Cybermen's presence in this way stronger than it otherwise might have been, because when you see them walking blank like that and then you see the Cybermen walking, you can equate the two very easily in your mind.
Yeah, sure.
I've never been a fan of how these Cybermen stomp quite so loud.
Yeah, the sort of weird, it's Stormtrooper.
Exactly.
March.
Yeah. I just kind of feel like it's one of those things where it's like if you want to like sneak up on your enemy, well, now you can't because the stomping is so egregiously
like it does
loud.
make sense why they've done that, because they do. It's just to play up sort of the more dark sci-fi horror element that you hear them before you see them.
100%.
And the fact that bullets aren't going to stop them, so it's not like when you see the army coming over the horizon, it's not like you're going to really be able to put up much of a defense.
I suppose, yeah.
But
and I also think that
yes, I'll
add one more thing before you get to talk about the Cybermen. I have never been a fan of delete as a catchphrase for the Cybermen.
Yeah,
for me that was always kind of like, okay, well, the Daleks have exterminate. We need to get the Cybermen something.
Yeah,
I don't.
But they don't. But they don't need that much. Like even something like upgrade might be a bit better because it's more subtle and it's more in line.
But like,
and more ironic.
That being said, like I do appreciate that there are like a few subtle nods to the original Cybermen of like our reality. Like there's a point where Lumix says "excellent," and that just had to be deliberate. I
don't doubt it. And even
I think there's also a Cyberman that says "you will become like us," like verbatim.
Yeah. Which is from Tomb of the Cybermen.
Yeah, exactly. It's always fun when you can get away with that also with parallel Earths because if these are Cybermen, then they would share some similarities.
It is very interesting, like with the design, and I'll get into this in more detail, but they are a very like uncanny design. I don't know where exactly they would fit in the uncanny valley, but they'd have to be pretty fucking deep inside it. Because they're really chilling. But the interesting thing is, they kind of get less frightening as the years go on, because again, like especially with the face, the Mondasian Cybermen really, really unsettle me. I'm not sure what it is, whether it's just they've got a mask, like they look like they've come out of a movie like Seconds or something, but there's something about it that really just gets under my skin. And even later on, when you've got the Cyber Controller in Tomb of the Cybermen, his look, his face, which has got kind of almost like a disturbing looking toy quality to it, and his really chilling voice, which they admittedly improved on because the Mondasian Cybermen, the original ones from 10th Planet, are a little goofy. The whole thing just looks really uncomfortable. You really get the fact that even though there's, like a humanoid creature sort of inside this thing, it feels really otherworldly, which is kind of great. Here, it is, don't get me wrong, it's still terrifying, but it's not. It's a bit more palatable, and I don't know, like I know that Iron Man hadn't come out, the big Marvel movie hadn't come out by this point, but there are sort of similarities. There's kind of a robot's, almost like a superhero quality to the design.
Well, especially when we get to the Moffat era and they start flying.
Oh, okay. That
the Iron Man comparisons come up significantly more.
It's hard not to see them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is very good design. Even like the little things like the sort of the little sort of diagonal teardrop thing, which is really great.
Yeah.
Nice that they kept that. And little nods like the little handlebars on the sides of their heads, which are good because it's a classic design, but it's not. It's more subtle than in other versions. You're not like when you see a Cyberman, especially in the 80s, like the head. That's the thing you notice. Because the rest of it is essentially just like a sort of a silvery spacesuit sort of thing with some gloves and boots. So, it's good that they sort of tapped into that and sort of, I don't know if I'd say improved, but changed it up, which is really good. Sure. And I must say, generally speaking, while I do have problems with how the Cybermen sort of fit into the whole story and the story in general, like individually and on a technical level, they're used in a really effective way, whether it be, again, horrifying death metal transformation with When the Lion Sleeps Tonight to just their physical presence. Oh, and incidentally, I forgot, I should have mentioned this earlier. Graham Harper, who directed the first episode of Revelation of the Daleks, also directed this story, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Not least of all because there's some body horror elements in Revelation, but just the way, like, he's got a good handle on close-ups, whether it be, the opening where you see, like Lumik's mouth is one of the first shots you see in the episode, or just the way the Cybermen are framed in view. It's all really quite good, but the dark sci-fi sort of horror and body horror elements are handled pretty well, and they're some of the strongest elements, I think.
Well, I would also be remiss, before we get into the negatives, I'd be remiss to not mention Murray Gold here.
Of course, no.
We've only just started giving him. We've only just started giving him the respect he deserves on the podcast. I think we only mentioned him for the first time. It was either in Girl in the Fireplace or Tooth and Claw. Or if School Reunion even was when we first brought him up, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Here, he creates the motif of the Cybermen. Those six notes that are pretty much consistent in every single Revival Who Cybermen story. And I'm a sucker for a good leitmotif. They're so effective when they work, and this one really works. And it can be used in so many different contexts. You pitch it up or down slightly, you get something more melancholy or more,
it's the subtle variations to
exactly.
Different kinds of emotions.
I find it strange that the Daleks didn't get anything like this. They're gonna have a bunch of different styles of theme as they go on, but I can't think of any Dalek leitmotif apart from like the synth like strum that happens every now and then.
And maybe the choral elements in Parting of the Ways when the Dalek army is invading the space station, but like that's not consistent.
Yeah, like there's whenever the choir comes back with the Daleks, there's always a different melody to them.
Yeah.
My favorite one is in Stolen Earth, but we'll get to that sometime later. But this Cybermen motif, it's so bloody good. I love it so much.
It's iconic. And there are other little bits in the score too. I remember I watched it yesterday, the bit where they're sneaking into the factory, and there's a nice little string bit, and it's almost like a Mission Impossible theme, but it's not obnoxious like when you see it in a bunch of movies that don't do it nearly as well. It's just subtle enough to say, oh, this is espionage spy time, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's subtle enough to work, and I really appreciate those details. Or even at the beginning, when you hear the Cybermen theme with those beautiful, unbelievably creepy little, I think like bells or something, and it's nice and subtle. But it's a leitmotif rearing its head. So yeah, I mean, props to Murray Gold. He's a big part of why the Cybermen are so fucking frightening.
Words cannot express how happy I am that Murray Gold is returning to Doctor Who this year.
I remember you were saying to me and Sam, like, why didn't nobody tell me? I thought you knew. I think because that's the news is...
No.
I thought that had been news for like a year or something.
No,
I'm getting my timeline wrong.
I think it was rumored for some time, but I don't think
it hadn't been confirmed.
It hadn't been properly confirmed until recently.
But yeah, it's very exciting.
It's so good. Like
that's gonna be great.
Because I don't have off the top of my head the name of the composer for the Chibnall era, and I'm sure they're a good composer, but they just cannot match Murray Gold for me.
Yeah, no, they can't. They're not.
I feel like the music in the Chibnall era, it sort of went back to the sort of more atmospheric stuff that Classic Who, like especially early Classic Who, was all about. I can't remember any of the like music of the Chibnall era as like
even then, like some of the music, maybe not for the really early stories, but like by maybe John Pertwee era, some of those themes, even if they are very hokey, they're more memorable than what we got in the Chibnall era, unfortunately.
Well, it's saying something that the most memorable musical moment of the Chibnall era is Rah Rah Rasputin.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into your gripes with the story now?
Yes, I will at this point. Okay, so yeah, there is a fair bit to unpack there. I'll try my best with it, but basically, I believe that what this story engages in is a fairly consistent theme of what I'm going to call technophobia, which may sound rather strange. What I mean by that is it's obviously dealing with the dangers of technology. That's a massive part of this story.
Of course, yeah.
But I think it's dealing with them in a way that is blunt, in a way that is unsatisfying, in a way that's unnuanced, and in a way that's just nowhere near precise enough to sort of justify the way it's been framed in the narrative. So, what do I mean by that? So, the overall impression I get from this story, which is admittedly quite a frustrating one, is a very kind of blunt, ooh, technology bad. And there are a lot of issues that it's touching on. Don't get me wrong, like they're in here, they address them, but they're not addressing them nearly as much for me to make it thematically satisfying. They're all just they're conflating a bunch of issues that basically amount to, oh yeah, no, don't trust the technology, guys. It's really scary, blah, and it becomes really annoying, and it does the whole the sort of chronic illness element that I mentioned. That's part of it, but that kind of rears its head more in the end. There's a number of different issues here. Now, I've written a fair few notes here, but I'll try to sort of sift through them as best I can.
Well, I'll cut in briefly and say I can see where you're coming from. The first thing that tips the Doctor off in the story that something is amiss is the the daily download with the earpods.
Yep.
And I can see where you're coming from, where it's like, well, clearly that's meant to evoke like a 1984 kind of thing, where it's like everyone's getting their information from the same place, and everyone's it's trying to evoke a similar group think kind of thing, but it's like that's like the only time in the entire story that kind of thing is even brought up.
Well, that's the thing. So, I'm just thinking how to. I will say,
the way that the Doctor solves the problem is by hacking. Like Mickey uses technology to hack.
That's true.
The Cybermen system. True. So that's like the only thing, but it's like one part of what could largely be a very technophobic story besides that. So it's not withstanding.
So there are a whole bunch of issues, but again, they get conflated into this one thing, but it would be much more useful to really dissect what the actual precise problems are. And they do address them, but they're not nearly as, detailed as they could be. So, for example, one of the biggest issues I see with the story, which they do touch on, is not technology, but the effect of rampant capitalism, for example.
Yeah.
The fact that it's addressed that the government, that like the president's basically said, some say, the company's bought out my government.
Yeah, that's true. And when the Doctor says that they made the Cybermen into a brand.
Yeah, or even like the daily download, like the fact that they've got all their information from this one company.
Yeah.
Like, that's your problem, man.
Yeah.
That's what we really need to be dealing with.
No, 100%.
I think it would be useful here to say something just as a point of comparison, and this does sort of kind of go to the chronic illness element, but anyway, this, by contrast, reminds me of that great line in Genesis where the Doctor says, "It's not the machines, it's the minds of the creatures inside them. That's the issue," and unfortunately, Genesis succeeds where this story fails. They're not dealing with these precise elements nearly enough to make it work for me.
Sure.
So if you look at Davros, for example, there are a lot of parallels between, I think, him and Lumik, and not just because, they wheelchair users.
I was trying not to say that, but I agree.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. The reason why it succeeds in Genesis, in my view, is because they make it very clear in a number of moments in that story that the issue is not science or scientific progress or the need for, survival. It's the evil means to which human beings, or in that case, Khalids, put them to, right? It's the fascism. It's not the technology itself. This is clear when the scientific team go to Davros and say, look, we accept that our species probably will have to evolve into something like the Dalek creature. That's real unfortunate, but all right, we understand that. But that's not the real issue. Davros, it's got to have a conscience. It must be able to distinguish right from wrong. It cannot exist without a conscience. That's the core of the issue. And that, of course, all comes to a head when the Doctor says, yeah, it's not the machines, it's the minds of the creatures inside them. That's the key issue. And again, they're getting close to it in this story, but they're just not taking that final step for me. And the way I would describe it, there's a lot of comparisons I could use to describe it, but the way I describe it is this. The bluntness that they're using to examine these very complex issues would almost be like going back in time to 1986 and saying, yeah, no one should bother studying nuclear medicine or radiology because Chernobyl happened. Do you know what I mean? Like it's, oh yeah, these horrible Cybermen are about, ooh, technology bad, guys. Don't trust scientific progress because it's all super scary. And it's very annoying. So, this is another small example, but at the beginning when Lumik is talking to the president and his yes men, and he says, I've taken the brain and put it in basically a cocktail of copyrighted chemicals, is what he uses to describe it. I'll ask you this, right? I'm not talking about the actual application of it, but just the principle of human-made chemicals, right?
Mm-hmm.
How is that different to medicine that treats mental illness? How is it different from antidepressants? How is it different to anti-anxiety medication? How is it different to medication that helps treat the symptoms of ADHD, for example? Again, it's not the technology. It's the evil means to which it's put. And they do address some of it, but not to the extent that I want it to. The way I look at the Cybermen themselves, for example, again, they do skirt to these issues, but the problem, there are two basic problems with them. The one problem is the way they're designed, the way they look, and the second problem is their emotional inhibitors. So onto the first issue. As I said, they would have to be pretty deep in the uncanny valley. They look terrifying, right? Not only that, but they also look all exactly the same. That crucial element of diversity in any society, that just gets completely swept away, which is horrifying. And you can't, the Doctor says, the only, really, just in terms of a sort of day-to-day survival thing, the only reason they've got the emotional inhibitors is because no human being is going to be able to handle that they can't cope with how they look physically. Anyway, so it's the uncanny design of them, and then there's the emotional inhibitor, which basically, that just takes away, what makes life meaningful, right? And again, they address them, but then that doesn't seem to be the full crux of the issue. They're not attacking it in a detailed enough way. And I think, for me, it all kind of comes to a head in that final, Doctor confrontation speech, right?
Yeah.
So he says a whole bunch of things there that are, again, very complex issues, but because they're all in this one speech and this one, Doctor confrontation moment, they all just kind of get crushed together. So I've got some of them written here. He's like, and imagination. What about that? The one thing that led you here. Really good point, but it's not the tech. Again, that's not the technological element. It's just the way that it's being used. And
yeah, well, I think his point there is like, if imagination is gone and everyone's like part of the hive mind, for example, there's no need to innovate, and there won't be any more technological advancements. Like he says, the Cybermen won't advance; you'll just stop.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, which is also true.
Which I think in that point, it's like he's talking about advancement like it's a good thing, whereas this is the reverse, right?
I guess I just
look. It's difficult because there is a lot of what you're saying is credible, and I wish,
like you see what I mean.
I wish I was intelligent enough to come up with a counter argument. But I'm largely not. Like I said, I don't have the same lived experience as you. When you say, like, how is the putting the brain into chemicals, how is it different from treating ADHD or depression? Yeah. I wish I had the lived well, no, I don't. But I wish I was intelligent enough to know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To know for sure if it is the same thing or not.
Sure.
Because, like, instinctively I go, well, of course it's not the same thing because this is putting people into... Like, this is detaching parts of a person and putting them in a metal suit for the most part against their will. Which
no, it's completely against their will.
Yeah, 100%.
No, it's completely fucked up.
Yeah.
And
there's something to once the emotional inhibitors all get shut down, the fact that Lumic is completely unaffected by it because he's the only person that knew what was coming and and was willing to do it, albeit not this early, but
yeah, sure. So and that makes sense, but like I think for me that whole scene comes to a head in this one line, which, for reasons you probably may guess, that really, really, really bothered me.
Before you say it, can I predict it?
Yeah, sure.
Is it once you get rid of sickness and mortality, then what is there to strive for?
Yeah.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
I had a feeling. It's a similar thing that you had with Sarah Jane in School Reunion.
Yes, I was gonna actually make that parallel. It's worse here, I think, than in School Reunion, but the core of it, it does bother me because, and I actually, I was thinking about this a bit, well, obviously when watching these episodes, but for me, the core of that argument seems to be a sort of, without the darkness, how would we see the light? And I'll be completely honest, Cuff, I'll just put my cards right on the table. I really can't stand that argument. I find it very frustrating, and I find it very naive as well. I mean, for an example, and I realize I'm taking this quote out of context, but can you imagine if the Doctor said that to somebody who just survived through, for example, the pandemic? I mean, that wouldn't look very good. No. I'm not gonna lie. That would be like, ooh, bit of a swing and a miss there, Doctor, eh? Yeah, it does bother me, and I get.
With that in mind,
I get that there's more of a context here.
Yeah,
because it's more about, not even so much like extending life or enhancing quality of life, but like just the pure idea of people being stuck in these bodies for all eternity and how terrifying that is. And I do understand that, but for me, if that was the issue, the Doctor should have gone into more detail about it. And I think he probably could have.
It's certainly an unfocused speech. Like it's not up there with his best, because it starts out with "you're killing imagination," and then it pivots to it pivots to this one line basically about illness and how innovations can be made by fighting it or something like that. I don't know, it's pretty clear. And then moves on to the Cybermen are going to stay like this forever. And then pivots to, well, the diversity of humanity is...
Exactly. That, like, literally...
It's almost like any one of these issues should have been the focus of a Cyberman story.
Oh, yeah.
And then you could take another one and make it the focus of a different Cyberman story. Like, these are all things that apply to the Cybermen, but they're sort of like being compacted into this one... Like, minute-long scene.
I've literally written here, like, in the ultimate confrontation between Lumic, the Doctor goes... with the Doctor goes from... And I've got all those lines written down, one after the other. Yeah, like, that's literally it. I was thinking this yesterday, he goes from this issue to that issue, but, again... The weird thing is, like, it's kind of both more complex and both more simple than the episode's able to acknowledge, because it's more complex in that, as you say, there's so many different facets of this that really need to be teased out in their own episode. Like, the thematic concerns of this story, you'd almost want to devote an entire season to them. You couldn't do it in just 2 episodes. And actually, for that reason, I don't entirely blame... the writers for doing that, because again this is just the limits that they had, right? They had to reintroduce the Cybermen story, they had to include the alternate reality element, and they needed to do it in 2 episodes of a 45-minute TV series, and introduce it to an audience. It's a massive undertaking.
It's huge.
So the fact that they weren't able to do this, I don't entirely blame them, and it could just be that this is just one of the things in Doctor Who that hasn't aged very well, but I think it's still worth bringing up because these elements are very present for me. And there are even smaller elements, like, this is what I mean by being more straightforward than it seems. The solutions to these problems are actually fairly clear. The biggest being, what Lumic needs is regulation. They touch on that in the very beginning, when the other scientist says, I need to inform Geneva of this. But that kind of gets swept away, and that's not the confrontation we're being handed in the end. That's not the big speech that the Doctor's giving. The Doctor's not saying, you once had this great idea, but look at how corrupt you've made it. Yeah, like, this isn't the ending of Invasion of the Dinosaurs, where the Doctor acknowledges, well, I actually really sympathise with these people. But what they're doing, their methods are pure evil, which of course, Lumic's methods are pure evil. By the way,
I will ask.
Sorry, go ahead.
Is there a similar kind of speech that the Doctor gives to the original Cybermen at any point? Is there ever a, this is amazing, but don't take it too far, or kind of thing, or have the Cybermen just always been treated as blanket evil?
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting thing. So as far as I know, like, to answer your question, no, there hasn't been like that sort of confrontation. Granted, some of the Cybermen episodes are lost now, so it'd be difficult for me to like find out totally. But as far as I know, no, they haven't. But in a weird way, they still are addressing the issue better by not addressing the issue. I know that sounds really weird, but, like, because this issue is trying to deal with the horrors of technology writ large, but the other Cybermen episodes aren't, that makes sort of them better than this, because they're not... You know what I mean? Like, they're not trying to hit the goal at all, so there's no goal to miss.
No, I see what you mean. Like, it's certainly a case of, like, if this wasn't a Cybermen story, but everything else was, like, exactly the same. If everything about the story was the same, but they just didn't call them the Cybermen. They were like, we're going to call them the Lumictrons, or whatever.
Yeah, or something like that.
Yeah, there probably would have been room for that kind of a conversation, because you don't have this pre-established history with the Cybermen to build on. And I think that in that way, they kind of shot themselves in the foot there, because the Cybermen are firmly established as the Doctor's second biggest foe, arguably, or maybe even third biggest if we're including the Master. Because there is that history, you kind of need them to keep being just the evil creations that they are.
Yeah.
But
and
then
I'm not
when you give them this kind of an origin where it's not with this kind of origin. They didn't have to be given the classic sci-fi every single member of this species is evil treatment. But they needed to because of the I know what you mean. It's really difficult.
It's like, here's another way of putting it. As I said, this is a very 2006 story. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
This is back when technology had not become anywhere near as integral in our lives as it is now. This is before Elon Musk bought Twitter. This is before TikTok. This is before
VR.
All these things happening. And even in terms of like the sort of monopolistic conglomeration of different companies. This is before Disney became the juggernaut that it is today. This is before the pandemic, for goodness sake. Again, the thing that the Doctor says, can you imagine him saying that to somebody who just got through a pandemic? Like, again, I know I'm taking it out of context, but like you see what I mean there, right? There's kind of an unsettling quality to it. So at the very least, this story I just don't think has aged as well as it may have been, and certainly hasn't aged as well as I expected it to. And I think, like, if we go back to the comparisons between Lumic and Davros, for example, it, like, Davros, the problem with them, again, is the way that they're applying the science. It's not the science themselves, or a better way of phrasing it, if you look at Davros, Lumic, or even Frankenstein for that matter, the issue is not that they're mad scientists, but they're mad scientists. It's the fact that Lumic and Davros are trying to project and impose their own megalomaniacal totalitarian will on their creations. It's the fact that they're clearly not giving a damn about any kind of regulation or systems that could mitigate any of their decisions. It's so clear that Lumic has barely thought about the ethical implications of how to apply this. And I should have said this before, but like, another disclaimer, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a bioethicist, so, again, as I often say, if anyone wants to call me out on this, please feel free. But at the end of the day, I think you could even say that Lumic, he's a bad scientist, yeah? He's not thinking about the implications and the impact that his creation is going to have on humanity. There would have to be a way better way of doing this, because if you could create, a humanoid being with a very sort of more like recognizably humanoid form, and maybe have it being, a whole range of physical diversity, and fix those problems with the Cybermen, and then remove the emotional inhibitor, which, as I said, by the way, only needs to exist because of how uncanny the designs for the Cybermen are. That sounds great to me. Like, and again, this is a bit more where the personal element is coming in, but frankly, as a chronically ill person, I would love to have a body that functions a bit better than mine does. And I should also mention, this is a small thing, but I'll bring it up anyway. The conversations around things like chronic illness and disability. It's a very, very complex subject, and I just want to make it clear, I'm not going to pretend to comment on the whole issue writ large, because I couldn't do that. It would be impertinent and wrong of me.
Sure.
To do that. I can only give my own personal experience with it. But as I say, that has impacted how I've viewed this story. So I just don't think it's aged as well as it could have. There are far more mature ways of looking at this, and there are better examples in sci-fi, frankly, that existed before and have existed since that look at these issues, whether it be in Black Mirror, for example, where they have, in a couple of episodes, the technology where they can basically take the human brain waves and turn them into data, and then store them in like hard drives and put them into alternate realities in other people's bodies. That's handled more maturely than it is here. Or even the question of the sort of the ship of Theseus thing, like what makes a human a human. Lumic basically he gets it right. Like, what does he say? He says like, the brain is what makes us human. He's correct. That I think that is what makes us human. Now, as to how much of the brain is to remain intact, that needs to be asked, but that's a separate question. Whether it's a certain amount of cyberization put into the brain. Is it I mean, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but the anime and the manga of Ghosts in the Shell, I can't remember what it was, but there's like some figure, some exact percentage in the movie where if a human being has, I think it's more than 94.8% cyberization, they're technically and legally considered a cyborg, which is a slightly different thing. So whether you want to define it like that or any other ways, I think these issues do need to be discussed. But the fact is, unfortunately, it's way beyond the scope of this story to be able to really tease out these, as I say, very, very complex issues. And for me, it just leaves it kind of narratively unsatisfying. I've got a couple, just some small things here. I'm reminded, I talked about Frankenstein earlier, but there's a line in the movie, the 1931 movie Frankenstein, that I'll just read out here that kind of reminds me of what I'm saying. Dr. Frankenstein, he says, have you never wanted to do anything that was dangerous? Where should we be if no one tried to find out what lies beyond? Have you never wanted to look beyond the clouds and the stars, or to know what causes the trees to bud, and what changes the darkness into light? But if you talk like that, people call you crazy. Again, maybe not a 100% comparison, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
These are important questions, I think, that do need to be explored, whether in reality or in fiction, as it happens. And I don't know if I'd go this far, but there was a period in the first couple of viewings of this story where I thought, Jesus Christ, it's like trying to examine these really, complex issues in the blunt way they are. It's almost like somebody trying to perform brain surgery with a claw hammer. Now, again, I don't know if I'd go so far as to say that, but you see what I mean.
Sure,
There's a bluntness here that isn't really gelling together. They need more time, more space, more thought, basically, put into how they're examining these issues. And for me, that really just stops it from being a great episode. And it could be, like, on a technical level, there's so many things that are working for it, but thematically, it's so dumb.
Sure.
I hate to say it, but like...
Yeah. Look, I don't even think that a lot of this stuff are things that they were like had in their minds when they were writing it. I think a lot of this stuff happened accidentally.
Oh yeah, no, I don't doubt it.
And we can agree that just before we wrap up completely, we can agree that the cliffhanger and subsequent resolution to the cliffhanger is pretty weak.
Yeah, I mean, like you said that this is a very, like, you need the first episode to watch the second, but it really is literally just one sort of continuous narrative, isn't it? Like, I know that Revival Who is supposedly meant to have, like, stronger conclusions than Classic Who. Stronger cliffhangers than Classic Who, excuse me. But, like, yeah, it's like, oh, we surrender. But, nope, just move on. That doesn't really pay off, does it?
But even that, like, that ties into another issue I have with the story as a whole. Like, the little shard of the TARDIS that the Doctor, like, gives some of his life to charge up. And he's like, okay, well, it's going to take 24 hours to do this. And then that night he uses it for a purpose that we did not know before that point it could do, and does not get used for that purpose ever again. And that supposedly means it needs 4 hours to recharge. And then... that night, still, the Doctor's able to put it back in the TARDIS and it works perfectly, even though the initial 24-hour period hasn't been even close to being expired yet, because that happened, I'm going to say, like, mid-afternoon on the
because it's, like, still nighttime when they get back to the TARDIS,
yeah,
isn't
exactly. Like, the only, like...
That is weird.
It's weird. Like, my mental thoughts when that was happening were, okay, well, presumably, once they resolved all the Cybermen stuff, off camera, the Doctor put more years of his life into the thing to power it up even faster. just so they could get out of there, because he famously doesn't like sticking around in the aftermath. But if that was the case, it should have been brought up.
Yeah.
And it's good to know that because of all these actions, the Doctor was able to stay on Trenzalore for decades less than he otherwise would have.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Anyway, but yes, so those, you know, the technophobia, as I identify it, is the big issue for me. And as you say, and as I sort of said, I don't really blame the writers for not, you know, I guess, I don't know, thinking outside the box, I guess. Again, it's 2006. Like they couldn't be expected to really see how technology was going to progress. And as you say, it's not... I don't think any of this stuff is really intentional. Maybe some of it more intentional than others, but overall, like, they're not literally saying, oh, don't trust tech... Like, they're not literally, like, your face saying, don't ever trust technology, guys, but when you put it all together with the things that the Doctor says, with the way the conflict is resolved, with also all the little signifiers, whether it be, you know, the terrifying image of the Cybermen marching over the horizon, or, as I said, I mean, I kind of loved it because of how fucked up it is, but the cattle basically being led into the cyber factories and getting, you know, churned to bits by the horrifying death metal looking apparatus with when the line Sleeps Tonight playing over it. And also something else that Mr. Crane says. He says in a darkly ironic way. He just says, "I'm told that the future ain't technology wonderful." It's like, okay, right, I see what they're doing. This is how they want to frame the issue. That's a little bit, you know. That's unfortunate. Cool. But the point is, all of these things just sort of come together in a way that is thematically very unsatisfying for me. And it was annoying because, again, they're getting close to the real issues. The unfettered capitalism, the lack of regulation, the uncanny valley design of the Cybermen, the horrible idea of having no emotions and how fucked up that is. But they're just not quite getting there. You know, and as I say, like, that confrontation with the Doctor, that was probably the worst it got for me. There were times when, that one line, without sickness or mortality, was this strophe, that really, really, really fucking annoyed me, but, I'm a bit more level-headed about it now. It doesn't annoy me quite as much, although it does still bother me. But anyway, the point is, when you put it all together, it just... I want it to be more satisfying, but it's just not quite getting there. And for me, it hasn't aged terribly well. It certainly is worse than I remember it being as a kid. And yeah, I thought I'd just bring that up. That's my piece, I think,
cool.
Basically.
Where would you rank this episode, then?
I think I'm gonna give it what I was sort of planning to give it when I first watched it in preparation for the podcast. I think I'm still gonna stick with a 6 for me.
Cool.
Technically well done, but thematically it leaves so much to be desired that it just sort of knocks it down several pegs for me.
Cool. I think I'm down to a 7.
Sure.
I think there were times throughout my watching that I was considering maybe even a 9, but before this today I was probably... Before we started today, I think I talked myself down to an 8. But I think a lot of the stuff you've brought up is very fair.
Sure.
But for me, there's still enough really, really good stuff here that means that I don't think I can rate it along with several of the 6s that I've given in the past.
Yeah, sure thing.
For me, a 7 is about right for me.
Yeah, that's completely fine. I was interested to see how this technology, good God, how this conversation was going to go. Because I was thinking, man, is it gonna be a bigger disagreement than calling the fireplace? How the fuck is that gonna look?
Well, I think it's difficult. I'm not sure if maybe even because we've had a bit of a break from the recordings that we've been able to sort of be more objective, I think, regarding this.
Yeah, to try digest that whole situation.
Yeah. But also for me, I think a huge part of it wasn't long ago that I was editing Girl in the Fireplace for release, and listening back to that one, I was like, I am interrupting him way too much. I need to actually listen to what he's saying. I don't think that influenced how much you would have swayed me, but I think I was more conscious this time to be like, okay, like, don't just jump down his throat every time he says something that you initially disagree with.
But I appreciate that, Cuff. Thank you. That means quite a lot. And even for me, because I did like listen back to it a little bit, and I have been thinking quite a lot about the podcast. I'm like, man, when Cuff said I was a bit of a Grinch, man, he wasn't fucking kidding.
I really hope that didn't
No, it's all right. It's okay. No, I understand. And I know you were joking. Like you said to me even privately that you were joking. But like I realized, oh yeah, but like the main thing is there were probably angles to that story I was probably missing a little bit. And I'm thinking back, I honestly, I was intending to do this before we did this podcast. But I definitely do intend to watch Girl in the Fireplace again because my opinion may slightly sway. And the way I view it is, the things that I pointed out, most of them still really bother me, and they probably will even if I watch it again, but I think that ending probably will look a bit different if I watch that story again, so I'll be very interested to see if I watch it again and have different thoughts on it. So, yeah, the point is, kind of good that we've had time to sort of step back, get some perspective, but yeah, I think... Again, given how much vitriol I had towards this story, especially like originally, I think it's actually really cool that the conversation has sort of turned out the way it is. I think it's been very constructive, which is awesome. Pretty neat.
Well, join us next time for what should be a simpler discussion.
Yeah, I think so.
We're going to be looking at the horror of Fang Rock, classic Fourth Doctor story.
Sure.
Until then, I've been Alex.
I've been Fitz.
And if you're going to delete anything, have it not be your subscription to this podcast.
God, that is so lame.
Yep. Despite what I just said, please do tell your friends and share this podcast around.
Yes, really please do that. Please. And apart from that, as Dr. Frankenstein said, "Oh, in the name of God, now I know what it feels like to be God." Don't know why I'm adding that, but there you are.